I would empower brands to design capabilities, solutions, and interactions, whether it is using AI or not, but particularly when you're using AI, as if you are onboarding a normal human employee. I think it is essential for AI to embody the brand tenets and brand standards, just as I and you would, being members of the organizations in which we serve.
Today on Adventures in Customer Land, Katie Costanzo, who's president of CX at CSG. I'm not going to say this was the longest, most arduous scheduling task we've ever tried to accomplish, but it was certainly up there. So glad we finally made it. And Katie, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Very excited to be here with you today.
So I've spoken with a handful of your colleagues in the past, fairly familiar with what CSG does, but our listeners may not be. So maybe just for additional context, tell us a little bit about what CSG does and your role there, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So CSG is the global leader in customer engagement, billing, and payment solutions. We are a purpose-driven SaaS platform that enables global companies across a wide variety of industries like healthcare, telecommunications, financial services, and retail to simplify their complex customer engagement practices in how they monetize in a digital environment. And I have the pleasure of overseeing our customer experience and engagement capability and solution unit. Our core product capability in the market as part of our overall platform is CSG Xponent. And that ultimately helps brands deliver real-time customer engagement to help increase revenue, create operational efficiencies, and build brand loyalty.
It's a good thing that wasn't a whole lot just packed into a few sentences. That'll take us the rest of this conversation unpacked. So CSG Xponent is a decisioning platform. No, it's a workforce process management platform. No, it's a billing assistance and loyalty platform. No, what is it?
So Xponent is a customer engagement platform that leverages orchestration and analytics to deliver real-time engagement in the moments that matter the most. So we think about five major critical areas across the customer life cycle, irrespective of the industry that you support, from onboarding and ordering and service through the billing journey and experience down to the contact center interactions that a consumer may have with the brand, and ensuring that organizations land and nail those five critical moments that matter through real-time decisioning and orchestration and digital engagement is at the heart of what our Xponent solution delivers to the market.
Okay, starting to become a little more clear. I'm faking it here because I actually do understand what CSG does, but I think there are probably listeners out there who just aren't quite as familiar.
That's fair.
So the end deliverable would be conceptually deeper engagement. Practically speaking, at the contact center level, you're delivering intelligence in real time that agents can respond to and use. Don't let me put words in your mouth if I'm getting this wrong, by the way.
Sure. I'll stop you.
Okay, good. And at the billing level, I'm interested to hear what it means at the billing level because real-time decisioning in billing is an interesting idea. Or did I misplace that?
No, you're kind of definitely picking up what I'm putting down, Mike. So if we think about some of the heritage of where CSG started in the back-end billing platforms for some of the largest telecommunication and cable businesses in North America, we sit on a mountain of billing information, and that ultimately helps us drive better decision making on prescribing cross-sell, upsell opportunities, mitigating billing confusion based off of what we know kind of shows up on a monthly bill. And for those who may be having kind of financial burden, who are maybe not the most diligent payers of their bills. We can, through generative AI solution sets, offer up, payment plans, and provide a very prescriptive experience to how a consumer would engage with that brand in that kind of part of the journey. Ultimately, making sure your bill is correct and accurate, you know how to pay it, and you know what services you are subscribing to. It's essential in building customer trust back to that brand. And Xponent and the suite of CSG products essentially allow us to do that for some of the largest brands in the globe.
Gotcha. I happen to have spoken to a handful of those people who are happily using your platform for those purposes. One of the things that prompted this conversation in the first place was CSG's recent State of CX report
Mhm.
and some of the findings in it. And it's always interesting to see, how things are changing, what the highlights are for some of these reports as they come out year after year. Was particularly interested in how CX kind of framed some of your findings because they were kind of eye-opening. These are my words, so I'm interpreting here. If I get this wrong, wave me off here. But um, credibility, empathy, and clarity are lagging behind on the consumer side. And there's data to back that up, but I don't think anybody would argue that clarity is lagging. You can pick any realm of life, and probably that's a truism. Empathy and credibility, though, are harder to track. So I'd love to hear more about, because you sit on mounds and mounds of consumer data,
Mhm.
what that looks like. What were the highlights? How did those spikes or drops or gaps, I should say, show up? And what do you think that means for customer-facing businesses, consumer-facing businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really clear intersection where with, empathy and clarity, ultimately consumers in this day and age are striving for a very consistent end-to-end experience that really shows a brand understands them. There's been concepts in the customer experience market for the better part of a decade of wanting, consumers wanting to be heard, known, and understood. And the brands that are able to close the execution to experience gap, I think, are the brands that certainly in the year ahead, in the years to come, are who we're going to start to see gain market share, increase lifetime value of their consumer base, and really win in the markets in which they serve. As you referenced, our state of customer experience report is kind of dubbed this upcoming year as the age of overwhelm. And we think about kind of what it means to provide that clarity to a consumer in an experience, whether it's a billing experience or a contact center interaction of the like, making sure that we are helping brands really cut through the noise. Consumers and businesses alike are completely inundated with communication overload. I think if you were to look at your, phone right now, Mike, you probably have, app notifications, emails missed, text messages missed, and calls missed. And if you pick up your phone, you're trying to figure out, well, what do I address first? And so a lot of the research that was conducted as part of our annual study was to validate how the natural consumer is feeling about this natural state of just being overwhelmed, not knowing what to act on, what is, kind of spam or marketing and not necessarily essential to pay attention to. And we kind of think obviously about the introduction of AI and all of that promise, making sure that at its core, a customer understands how to get through a task, start to finish without a bump, and that they can do business with the brands that they want to in a clear and concise fashion, one with kind of respect and empathy and that emotional connection at its core. Obviously, given that any consumer who does business with a brand is looking to to do that relationship largely because they trust the products and services that they're getting, that there is an inherent relationship there. And I think a lot of relationships are built obviously on trust and empathy and a mutual understanding of what the desired outcome is. So yeah, I would say, I mean, that's kind of how I would initially describe, some of what the report findings were on what it means for brands to seek getting clarity for customers across the experience and, um, how they can, kind of how organizations can route through that, and make sure they're really cutting through the noise in this upcoming year.
I've had a few conversations with large scale technology providers that service large consumer facing enterprises. And the idea of trust is a big theme lately.
Mhm.
It erodes really quickly in some realms and is really tough to regain in others. I'd love to hear how CSG, or maybe you specifically, because you kind of sit at the top of the CX pyramid there,
Mhm.
um, how you view that kind of, what's the right way to phrase this? How do you build trust at scale when essentially you're delivering a technology? So how do you build trust that lasts, that resonates, that doesn't just erode when the first problem happens?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think it starts with understanding what the customer is expecting of that brand in that moment. And again, whether you are, regardless of the type of interaction and even the ch type of channel that a customer is engaging with, making sure that, as a brand, you're building that experience with your consumer, right? For a while, we've heard kind of, have the customer have a seat at the decision-making table. Making sure that, the organization kind of embodies that customer obsession and that you're focused on processes, that ultimately hopefully drive efficiency in the business, but that, are also focused on the customer outcome. At the end of the day, a customer wants to, go to their bank and get a transaction done with ease and simplicity. They want to, pay a bill with ease and simplicity. And when those again critical moments have challenge or problematic, or, there's a ton of channel switching between, those experiences, there becomes a ton of friction. And again, consumers don't feel like they are even known. They're just another number. And so brands really need to work in overdrive to regain that trust, knowing that consumers can switch, on a dime, right? And maybe even less than a dime at this point, right? Switching costs are essentially zero brand to brand. And so
Yeah.
if we think about, the power and the leverage being on the consumer side, brands have to work in overdrive to make sure that those experiences are flawless, and they're taking into consideration and preserving the time and energy of the consumer and making sure that those things get executed. Because when the small things break, it doesn't matter if it was one experience or 10 experiences, but when there's a million kind of paper cuts along the way, that's when trust really starts to erode, and consumers are just going to go to the next brand that either provides an equal or better service.
So I think what I heard, I'm interpreting and editorializing here substantially. What I think I heard is that the real keys to lasting trust happen before the engagement. It happens with a kind of innate understanding of who your customer is, what they're about, what they're there for, what they're trying to accomplish, what their own particular parameters are, which would, I guess, if you can start the relationship off with that kind of understanding or close to that, um, you're in a much better position. You've kind of crossed the starting line with some momentum, I guess, the way
Yeah,
I would put it, if
yeah,
if I've got that right.
great.
And so, the idea would be that kind of mitigates whatever, as you mentioned, these death by a thousand cuts kinds of problems. Can we talk a little bit about what some of those little micro cuts might be, the little tiny cracks, because you see them all, or at least you see a chunk of them. And it occurs to me that large organizations, especially, have a strong tendency to pay attention to the larger gaps.
Mhm.
Um, but I think a customer doesn't care how big the gap is; they just see a gap.
Yep.
And what that means by default is the smaller ones, the tiny fissures and the crackles, just don't get addressed. But first of all, so I'd like to hear what you think some of those cracks and fissures are, and then what does a company do to mitigate that?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we've touched on a couple of these, right? But if you think about um, a a message that's getting deleted in someone's inbox again because they're inundated with communications from not just one brand but every brand that they do business with. Unfortunately, a lot of those messages can often be mistaken as spam or marketing messages, things that are not necessarily action oriented. But if it is to pay a bill, pay your mortgage, and you miss that, thinking you've mistaken it, that becomes problematic. If you miss an appointment because of poor follow-up and communication from a brand, whether it's for a provider, you're going to your doctor, you're getting a flu shot, or you've missed a technician to your home, again, those become pain points for the consumer, right? We all, live busy lives and are scheduling things around, when we choose to do business with certain brands. And when those experiences don't happen as expected, it causes a lot of disruption in our personal and professional lives. And, we go back to kind of thinking about billing errors. When there's an error or your bill is confusing, and there's no real way to explain it other than calling to a call center and screaming representative 5 times. Some of that becomes quite frustrating. And so you think about ways in which you can improve that. Again, it goes back to really understanding and knowing your customer, having the technologies, having a unified set of data. I feel like the CX market has been plagued with the desire to have all data connected in a single central repository. And in some cases that becomes an overwhelming task for internal businesses to be able to unify, to connect all the data. I think if you start small, you solve for some of those cracks in the experience, you can build success from there. But making sure that you think about kind of breaking down some of the data silos. So you're using contact center data more powerfully. You're using billing data more powerfully. You're again looking at ways to improve the experience gap and understand where kind of brand execution is missing the mark from what customer experience expectations are. And from there, being able to then really create an improvement strategy that allows for brands to kind of lessen that expectation with its end consumers.
You can optimize for NPS, and that's good. You can optimize for CSAT, also good. You can optimize for loyalty, and that's good too. But here's the thing. If you're not optimizing for total customer value, for total customer profitability, then you're just optimizing for output, not the bottom line. Here's the truth. If your strategy isn't building better customers, more frequent, more loyal, more deeply bonded, then it's not a strategy, it's a performance. At Customerland Studio, we help brands find the value, find the opportunities, the force multipliers hiding inside the customer relationship. And then we help them optimize for scale, for yield, for profit across the entire relationship. Because the other thing we've learned, the only strategy that actually matters is the one that makes your customers more profitable. Customerland Studio, to make better customers. Go to customerland.net and click on the studio. So the next conversation we have, we'll spend more time talking about the problems we both see with the CX world's approach to building value, because there are lots of them, and I think I can already tell we agree on most of it. But there are also some really practical solutions to that. So we don't need to make this a tongue-wagging session, but the next time we get together, I do want to spend time discussing how CSG advises clients, because a big part of what you do, I know, is advisory in nature. So we're going to add that to the agenda for next call. For now, though, I'd like to pull out some highlights, cherry pick a couple of data points from your State of CX report. because I mentioned at the top of this call that some of them are quite eye-opening. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to pull them right off the top and we can
Yeah.
talk them through.
Yeah.
7 out of 10 consumers feel brands send too many messages. They
Mhm.
don't care what brands are saying anymore. Now, before you answer, I want to answer and say yes, complete agreement. Every single consumer in the Western world would say yes. It's been the case for, ever since email was invented, I think. But CSG has some unique solutions and ideas behind that. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to, the need to harness information. We talk about brands being able to move at the speed of experience. And you need to be able to do that by tapping into real-time analytics, making informed decision using journey analytics is going to be essential so that as the experiences are unfolding and happening, brands are, equipped with the right intelligence to make the necessary next best action for not just that consumer, but for every consumer that is even yet to go through that experience. So I think that's one area to make sure that again, brands start to cut through the noise is being empowered with access to the right data and in real time, given how fast moving the world is these days. Um, Again, consumers want to move at their own pace. They want to get in and they want to get out and on with their lives. And it's essential for brands to be able to keep up with that pace of innovation as well. Um, I would say, we touched on this just a little bit ago, but focusing on kind of data unification and really understanding how to break down those tech silos that are quite prevalent in and across the business. And a topic we haven't talked about a ton yet today, Mike, just with the kind of continued evolution of AI, generative AI, and now agentic, very much showing a ton of promise in driving business efficiency, and supporting customers at scale much more effectively than, armies of humans can, making sure that as you think about deployment of those more advanced capabilities and technologies, that you're doing so in a very tightly scoped way, um, so that those that are maybe not as comfortable interacting with non-human forms of support, as an example, um, that trust doesn't erode, and that they remain loyal consumers of your brand.
On that point,
Mhm.
if I understood correctly, 50%, 56% of the consumers your report surveyed are uncomfortable letting AI take action on their behalf. So
Yeah.
agentic AI, and well, let me not comment here. I'd really like to hear your opinions rather than my own. But
Yeah.
agentic AI has some room to go to achieve kind of you know, comfort and ubiquity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the pace of innovation has certainly been quite astonishing. I think about some of the early capabilities that came out, over the last even few years. We're seeing the innovation pace substantially increase. It's now things are getting done in days and weeks, not months and years any longer. And again, for CSG to keep up with it, for any brand to be able to keep up with it, you've got to have a level of discipline, in your organization. You've got to start thinking about the right governance structures, which are essential for the right deployment of that kind of solution set inside a business, and especially anything that's going to kind of interact or touch a consumer or customer is going to be critical. Um, I mean, there's a ton of promise that agentic solutions certainly offer organizations and our consumers. I mean, the fact that you are essentially giving agency to a non-human individual to perform an end-to-end task and execute flawlessly. Again, it feels a bit sometimes, at least for me, a bit sci-fi in nature, right? That we are at really this point of kind of technological advancement. But it again, it is going to be the way in which we work. And while, as you said, 56 some odd percent of our consumers are not yet comfortable, it also means that there is a high proportion who are. And so really making sure that you're deploying those solutions gaining the efficiencies where you can, slowly introducing agentic-like capabilities in ways that make consumers comfortable when they're not, right? So offering on-ramps to human interactions when a task can't be fully completed, as an example, or somebody just wants to talk through in a one-to-one interaction is going to be essential for building that trust and getting that additional, percentage of population comfortable with using the technology over time. I think there's a lot of strategies brands need to be thinking about. Again, on ramps and off ramps is going to be one of them. The governance, being really clear when agentic solutions are being used, when they're not, what they can do and what they can't, is all part of that trust building factor. And making sure that organizations also know kind of what is a chatbot, what isn't a chatbot, where there's more rigidity, and when to properly deploy, because not there's been a ton of studies, I'm sure you've seen them, whether it's MIT, EY, there's been a ton of publications on that agentic solutions haven't yet fully delivered on the promise that they have, businesses have expected by way of business efficiencies and maybe cost savings. I don't think we're that far away from that full expectation coming to fruition, but making sure that there is a pragmatic deployment of agentic solutions in your business is essential for any organization that's contemplating and using. Because certainly, if you're not in the game, you're going to be very quickly left behind come 2026.
One of the things that kind of occurs to me as I talk to folks in similar positions who are all kind of recognizing the potential of agentic AI, dealing with some of the current hesitations and trust levels that are still not quite there, is that agentic AI seems to have this kind of all-in-one label to it right now. And yet, agentic AI, as it's deployed across really critical functions, consumers will rightly be a little bit less like just giving and trusting. You can't just turn the keys over to somebody who you've never really done this kind of thing before for life critical tasks. I'm thinking of healthcare right now.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that agentic AI, by definition, will eventually be built to interact with other agents. And so the complexity of the relationships there between these agents grows, and so will I think the potential for mistakes, failures, bad actors in these chains, because it's all going to be invisible. I am really, really, I think, impressed because, as you mentioned, the other side of that 56% that aren't comfortable with agentic AI right now, that means that 43% are. And that's really a giant number if you consider that 3 years ago, 2 years ago even, the consuming public really wasn't trusting AI at all as a concept. So here we are, maybe baby steps towards trusting those things. But it all comes back to brands and companies, consumer-facing organizations' ability to gauge that trust and those expectations and manage towards it. So I'll have to get off my soapbox now because that was actually your soapbox.
Yeah, no, I think AI transparency is going to be critical. And I think the fact that there's been such a significant shift in just adoption comfortability, again, from my kind of seat, I think it has more to do with the fact that AI is more mainstream now than when it first really started to be discussed. And again, if you're using any of the AI capabilities, maybe not full agentic for your own personal use, I think there's general comfortability that starts to get built. And then when you see those capabilities being offered by your brands, you're more likely to use those, especially if they can truly operate autonomously and allow you to, again, get whatever it is that you need done faster and more efficiently. Not everybody wants to talk to a human all the time, regardless. And so, brands that have those multi-channel ways of interaction, I think are going to start to see separation in the market.
If you had the worldwide microphone You don't. We have a small but dedicated audience. It is
Yeah.
not the worldwide microphone. But if you did for 2 minutes, what would you like enterprise level consumer facing organizations to know about this moment in time and what's coming down the pike and how they can either avoid the pitfalls or leverage those things that can be leveraged?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, just on kind of continuing to pull the thread on all things kind of AI and agentic, given it is a lot of what certainly we are contemplating at CSG on how we deliver more AI ready solutions to the market. I would empower brands to design capabilities, solutions, and interactions, whether it is using AI or not, but particularly when you're using AI, as if you are onboarding a normal human employee. I think it is essential for AI to embody the brand tenets and brand standards, just as I and you would, being members of the organizations in which we serve, ensuring that, empathy, the necessary guardrails, there's clear accountability, that all of those are kind of embodied as you think about what it means to deploy kind of, AI in really pragmatic ways as you enter kind of 26 and think about the year ahead. I also think that there's got to be a level of actioning, right? Brands need to start, they need to start somewhere. You're going to get left behind. Need to prove value, continuously test and learn, and evolve your strategies over the course of the upcoming year to constantly be ideally one or two steps ahead of the market and what your consumers are demanding of you. And then I would just say continue to focus on closing the experience gaps that your consumers are still frustrated with. Leverage the wealth of data the brands sit on and act on it. Do so in real time and use analytics to fuel what to focus on next, so that organizations can meet the need and meet the demand of their consumers.
Well, this was the rich conversation I anticipated it would be. So thank you for that. And I do want to get back on your schedule because I think maybe elevating the conversation a couple of rungs up the ladder here, just to talk about some of the broader concepts that I know that you and CSG are well aware of, and the hurdles conceptually and strategically that the world faces with these new technologies, and how CX in specific is going to try and solve some of those.
Yeah.
But for now, Katie, thanks a million. I really appreciate this.
I appreciate it, Mike. Love the conversation. Thanks so much.